Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Form of Therapy. We are interrupting today's regularly scheduled culture study to bring you another PD versus the internet. We did one previously about the BTS law, and since then I just merely took a break from kind of just retooling the channel, and I was trying to figure out a way to bring this back or reformat it, but with all that's going on, I felt like, well, this is the appropriate time to probably do this again. I don't pay attention to Korean news a lot. I live in the States, so there's a lot of fire and chaos going on over here, and so I primarily pay attention to the news in the US. With everything that's going on in Korea right now, it eventually kind of spills over, and people told me on a stream recently about what's going on, so I decided, okay, sounds like a pretty big event, I should look into this. And it was like the equivalent of walking into a room already on fire. It is a giant mess. There's a lot of bullying accusations going on, and I'm here today to talk about the context of that, why that's happening, and also kind of mediate between an argument that's going on the internet right now, which is basically Koreans versus non-Koreans about bullying and the differences in bullying, because there are some people saying it's not as serious, some people saying it's serious, and there are people not understanding why bullying is different in Korea, and there are people in Korea that don't understand the bullying difference in America as well. So as a Korean American, I'm going to sort of explain both sides, because I have actually been through both school systems as well, and I have actually endured both types of bullying and chaos as well. So I can sort of give you my input and sort of my side of the story. With that said, note, this is how it always goes with any situation. This is just my side of the story, and this is my input and how I see things and how I view things. That is the same way with anything else. That is the same way with the accusations. Note that there are two sides to every story. That's not to say I don't believe any of the bullying accusations, but I am definitely saying I do not believe everything I see until I do either my full research or there is evidence. But that is when the bullying controversy becomes tricky, and we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. We're going to start with why this is happening. I too was like, why is this happening? Why all of a sudden? This isn't just like, oh, someone accused someone of something. This is like a reckoning. This is like almost like another version of the Me Too movement, but specifically regarding bullying. So what brought this about? Well, it's a factor of two things. It's a scandal. It's a bullying scandal that broke out in Korea over two volleyball athletes who are actually twins. They were accused of bullying. Several victims came forward. They did not identify themselves, but the athletes did admit to it, and they were dropped because of it. It made waves, and it inspired many people to speak up. But there's a second reason. So Naver is the biggest search engine in Korea. Think of it as the Google of Korea, but Korea is a lot smaller, and unlike America, there aren't as many divisive search engines as like Yahoo and Bing or whatever, which I don't know who uses them, but apparently they still do, you know. But Naver is pretty much the default go-to, and people use Naver very differently than we use Google. Culturally, there is a trending result. When you go in the search bar, it gives you the top trending results, so you can take a quick glance and you know already what are the biggest trending news results in Korea at the moment right now. It keeps you in the zeitgeist, it keeps you in the know. However, apparently Naver has announced that they are going to be getting rid of this feature. By getting rid of this feature, people are worried that people are going to be sweeping scandals under the rug. How that works is basically if a scandal breaks out, it dominates the search results in Naver. And because of that, everybody in the country knows about it. You have to realize Korea is still a very small country, so the influence of one website can affect an entire country. It's that small, especially given how the major metropolitan cities are very concentrated in Korea too, whereas the US, it's insanely spread out, right? It's one gigantic country. So because of that, people think, okay, idols, actors, celebrities are just going to get away with all this stuff that they've done in the past or any scandals, so we got to expose them now, is sort of the mindset that people are going through, and that is why there is this revolution of accusations coming about. I'm not going to mention any specific accusations. There has been so many many, and I don't know what's been proven and disproven, but at the same time, I'm not a drama channel. I'm not here to talk about the specific accusations. I'm here to provide context. I'm here to provide context about a specific argument I'm seeing, which is some of these things are going to be true and some of them may be false. But they are sort of downplaying it, and Korean netizens find this situation frustrating because bullying is a very serious matter in Korea. In fact, it is one of the biggest scandalous issues in Korea. And bullying is a prevalent issue in America, yes, but it is not as widespread, national, serious, career-ending stuff as it is in Korea. And so I think non-Koreans, especially Westerners, those who live in the U.S., can't speak to any other country's cultures, but aren't quite understanding what's going on. But also Koreans are also not quite understanding why Americans are a little bit more jaded. And so let me provide both sides of the context. I've been seeing this argument that bullying in Korea is the worst, or it's worse than America. There's a lot of arguments that are being made for that. I've experienced both sides of it, and it is hard to say which one is worse than the other because bullying in America is actually different in and of itself, not just from Korea. So my bullying experience in America is going to be very different from other bullying experiences that people had in America. And so that alone is already going to make this a very different and subjective argument. Just keep that in mind. For me personally, I grew up in the 90s in Southern California. If anybody either grew up in the 90s in Southern California or if anybody was aware of what happened during the 90s, you have a rough idea of kind of what I went through, especially given the fact that I was Korean. I was surrounded by other Koreans and brown and black people of color. And that was a very racially intensive time. There was a lot of bullying back then, just for being Korean. There were other reasons to be bullied as well, but it became much more racially tense as I got older. I got bullied as a kid by an older individual. He was actually Korean, and he was a Korean American though. This specific comment I read said that like it's not like how it is in America, which is people calling you names and stealing your lunch money. Ooh. There are some things that you are just not culturally going to understand unless you live there. Just like how a lot of Americans are not understanding how bad it is in Korea. I think Koreans don't understand how bad it can be in America. In America, there are, people being shoved, kicked into lockers. There are people literally just fighting full-out brawls, doing suplexes with each other, cracking each other's skulls. That's not even like getting into the gang aspect of things. Once you get into the gang aspect of things, which is what I went through, it's fearing for your physical life. Just trying to eat a burger in public and fearing for a drive-by. It's fearing that this kid that's about to fight you has a knife, or worse, even a gun. It was a much more dangerous time. And that's not to say Korean bullying doesn't lead to physical violence or it doesn't lead to fearing for your life. But if we're quote unquote comparing fears, I think fear of getting shot was always worse than fear of getting bullied and fear of whatever my Korean bullies brought to the table. So Korea's problem, in my opinion, not just the bullying. See, Korea, the bullying can be mental. It can be physical, it can be calling names, but the kind of bullying that you think of with America, of people getting pushed against into lockers, people getting kicked, punched, that kind of stuff happens in Korea all the time too. In terms of violence, Korea can be just as violent when it comes to bullying. The only thing is that American violence can quickly escalate into knives and guns. That is the one thing that will always make America worse. However, the main core of this issue with Korea and this issue overall, and is one of the main problems of Korea beyond just bullying, is that this is a systemic issue of abuse and an abuse of power as well. One, the bullies here are enforcing their abuse of power, whether it's a power hierarchy, whether it is a senior picking on a younger kid, or it's just, a bunch of people being dicks. It's people being abusive with their power. But what makes the Korean situation different is you can't speak up. You really can't speak up. There's a saying that you hear in American media, right? Which is, we believe the victim. We believe the victim. That's because people have not believed the victim for a long time in regards to a variety of cases in America, right? But in Korea, you could go to your teacher about it. They will acknowledge it, or they will gaslight you into saying like, well, maybe you shouldn't be such a little bitch. Maybe you shouldn't be such a little wimp. Maybe you should stand up for yourself or whatever. Korea will acknowledge the bullying. Teachers can acknowledge the bullying, or they might sweep it under the rug, whatever. Ultimately, because it comes down to an abuse of power, that might be a range of issues. Either the teachers just don't want to get involved. The teachers are afraid of getting hurt. There's another wide issue there, because there are some people saying like, oh, this bullying stuff in Korea is only happening because the teachers can't fight back, because the teachers can't hit the kids, was some comments that I saw from Koreans, which that's not a solution either. Koreans hitting their students was okay even when I was younger. It's not okay now. The laws were changed. But it was really bad back in the day, because when teachers were allowed to hit kids, this bullying thing was almost like the reverse. Teachers went overboard. They abused their power. They abused their students. And it's why it was largely overturned. But now, because of that, we went way too far with the swing. Now, on the other side, the kids are running rampant and the teachers are too scared to do anything about it. Like, literally, there are videos of students who will pick on their teachers, kick their teachers, punch their teachers, yell at their teachers, and the Korean teachers will do nothing about it because they are scared. Imagine that. Imagine in America if a U.S. student hit a teacher, right? If some kid just hit a teacher, yelled at a teacher, that kid would be expelled, if not arrested and sent to juvie. That's not a thing in Korea. In Korea, consequences and fear of consequences are very little, especially when you're younger. And then there is the parents issue. So whether it is a parent in power, which that is also another issue. One of the bullies could have a parent in power. That's a very common thing. And that provides a lot of problems for the school. It's when Koreans say, oh, like, you're going to regret it, or I'm going to come for you, they mean it, Americans say that all the time, and then they fizzle out, and then whatever. But here, they actually mean it. You have to understand, Korea is a small country. Korea is a small country, so people can be very vindictive. And you have to see that Korea, whether it's a small town countryside, whether it's somewhere in Seoul, Korea is all about their communities, and everything is built up by local governments, local communities, and so even a small influence of power goes a long way. And so Korean schools, especially the Korean mindset, is we don't want to deal with this mess, so let's just kind of sweep it under the rug. You also have to realize Korea has that sort of, oh, just toughen up mentality, right? Whether you're a boy or a girl, oh, just toughen up. You could literally be picking on another student in front of another teacher, and the teacher will most likely not do anything about it. From my personal opinion and my personal perspective, that may happen sometimes in America, but in large part in America, that doesn't happen, or if it does happen, it does not get excused. Either the child gets expelled, or the child gets suspended, or they face some kind of criminal charges. That's not the case in Korea. These kids aren't going to face jail time for bullying, get expelled, or transfer schools for bullying. It's just going to be quietly kept under the rug. In large part, Korean students just keep their mouths shut and then endure, and that's it. Now, this is where it gets tricky. I have been on the internet long enough to definitely be of the camp of don't believe everything that you read. Don't believe everything that people say. All people are corrupt. But that's not to say I believe every single one of these accusations. I'm not doing this because I worship idols, or I can't accept the fact that, oh, my idols aren't perfect, or whatever like that. I don't subscribe to idol culture like that, all right? I will be the first one to tell anyone, do not fucking trust anybody. Do not trust your idols. Do not trust anybody. Do not trust companies. Do not trust staff. Do not trust people. It's not power that corrupts. It's people that corrupt. But I just feel like it's hard to prove bullying. That's what's tricky. How do you prove bullying, especially when it's systemic bullying? And how do you prove that you didn't bully somebody? It's hard, It's not like you can document bullying, especially if you didn't speak up about it at the time. We are in a situation where Anybody can lie about bullying if they just went to the same school, and that's it. And we are also in a situation where an idol can just say, I didn't do it, and then that's it. How is a victim going to prove that the bullying actually happened? And how is an idol actually going to prove that it didn't actually fucking happen? I feel like this is where peer cases come in handy, witnesses and stuff like that. But defamation law is a very, very serious issue in Korea. It's why a lot of people also don't speak up, because if you speak ill about somebody, they could sue your ass for it. I don't speak legalese, but hey, even if you're right, you could lose a case. That happens in American court systems all the time. I've never been to Korean court, so I can't speak to that, but I assume that is also a worry there. So we're at a bit of an impasse. What do? We want to believe all the victims, but we're also in a situation where largely don't have any proof. And also, even the term bullying, it could be so tricky. How does one define bullying? Like, sometimes it might just be a shitty person who had a shitty relationship with somebody. I think that came out recently. Someone accused her of bullying, and then they immediately backpedaled and said, oh, turns out it wasn't bullying. We just had a bad relationship, and I should have worded it better. Here's the thing about life. You're gonna have bad relationships with a ton of people. You're gonna give bad impressions to some people. Some people are not going to like you. That's a part of life. And some people are going to be so crazy and so misconstrued in their own head that they might think you two have a hateful relationship when you've never even talked to them. Just like how love can be so one-sided, how you can look at another person and like project all the things that you romanticize and love about a partner. You can project that onto somebody else. You can project hate onto somebody else as well, which is why this is a very precarious situation. But at the same time, you could go through a very real experience and people can gaslight you. Like a Korean teacher might be like, hey, it's not that serious. Me specifically, as a Korean, when I went through sort of like the Korean educational system, it was in high school, and there was a lot of fighting. It was very physical. I was bullied at first. They picked on me. They would kick me. They would punch me. I spoke up to my teacher about it, and my teacher was like, that's just how it is. And that was it. I told even my parents, and it's just like, yeah, like, be a man. It's also a society that just like is like that. There are some people, if they're old-fashioned enough, who believes like hitting is still the way to go. And so literally, I could not get the bullying to stop until I actually physically fought back. In that situation, I had to physically learn to fight back, and that is how I literally gained the respect of my bullies. They literally started respecting me and started treating me like, I don't know, a decent human being, and not fucking hitting me every time when I finally lashed out and I finally fought back. Korean system, the bullying case is bad, but I will say, in terms of like the differences of bullying, it's pretty similar. Korean bullying and American bullying, it is about picking on someone every day, mentally torturing them, and yes, sometimes physically hurting them as well. But they're both worse in different ways. And ultimately, that's where we come to the conclusion of this. There are people arguing that American bullying is worse, and people arguing that Korean bullying is worse, and not really. They both have the same core issues of bullying, but they get worse in different ways. American bullying can get worse because it escalates to knives, guns, mass shootings, gang violence. And then Korea, something I don't like to talk about too much, but it also could lead, it's a systemic abuse of power, gaslighting, just years of emotional torture and silence, or suicide. Of the first world countries, Korea is up there in terms of suicides. It used to be the number one. I believe it might be Japan now, but Korea used to be the number one first world country in suicide rates. So that's where we're at with this situation. And so I would say both sides need to be a little bit understanding. You have to understand your idols can be corrupt. They could have done bad things in the past. I personally am of the belief that people can change and people can get better, right? And, sometimes people are assholes. That's a part of life. And we shouldn't hold people up to be these perfect standards. But why are Koreans mad? Why are Koreans so up in arms about this issue? Because for me, I don't want to speak on behalf of the victims, but this is from my outside situation, seeing the frustration in Korea. This is not just about the bullying, but it's that they're getting away with it, and also the years of gaslighting that they had to put up with, the years of emotional trauma of keeping their mouth shut. I think people are getting fed up because if you look at the president that was impeached some odd years ago, if you look at the Burning Sun scandal, if you look at all these different scandals that have come out of Korea in the past 5 to 8 years, it has all been about an abuse of power. It has been about people in powerful positions helping other people get away with it. That has been the core of Korea's issues for the past years. So for us Westerners, it may seem like bullying. I mean, like everyone goes through some bullying. Why are people like so up in arms trying to end careers about it? But you also have to understand they are going through years of a struggle of being silenced, right? Maybe people are speaking up because it's not just about the bullying. It's about being so sick and tired of whether the government or celebrities or people they went to school with abusing their power and jerking them around. So yeah, that is today's episode of PD versus the Internet. I'm so sorry that this episode was incredibly long, but it's a very, very nuanced issue. And I think that we as non-Korean born, Korean living people have to also empathize and sympathize with the fact that other countries go through other issues differently. For me, I definitely fought more when I was in the Korean one. I'll say that. The bullying was more consistent, it was more common, and it was more frequent. But for me, it did feel worse in America because in Korea, I feared for my life, but fearing for my life because I'm being bullied and physically punched and kicked around and yelled at is different from being bullied and fearing for your life because you're afraid that someone's going to bring a gun to school, which someone did. And he did get expelled. Fearing for your life when a kid pulls out a knife. Those were worse and more fearful experiences for me. But at the end of the day, you can't be arguing that issue of what's worse and what's not, because ultimately pain and fear is subjective. It doesn't matter if it's worse in America or if it's worse somewhere else. Just because bullying is worse in America does not mean that that traumatic bullying experience was any less traumatic for that Korean person, right? It's a dick move to try and argue what bullying experience is worse and to say like, let's not make a big deal about this. Pain is subjective only to the user who is experiencing it. So yes, worldwide, there might be worse bullying, but for this Korean individual, this one person, for them, they have not experienced that. They have only experienced what they have experienced. And for them, for their experiences, this is the worst thing that they ever went through. So, let's not be dicks. Let's just try to be supportive. That's not to say let's just start a witch hunt and try to persecute everybody. We don't necessarily need to keep quiet, but we also don't need to shove our voices in sometimes where it doesn't matter. I do think international K-pop fans should be getting involved with this issue. I do think we should get involved. But also, we also need to sort of stay in our lanes on certain things, especially issues that we have not experienced or don't understand personally. If you've been through something terrible and someone else has been through something terrible, it's kind of a dick move to then tell that person, hey, your terrible thing, it's not that bad because what I went through is worse. That's a dick move. But guys, let's all love each other. Let's all be good to each other. And let's also acknowledge that as people, we all make mistakes and we should learn to grow from it and forgive each other and be better for it. But guys, that's it for today's episode of PD versus the Internet. Thank you very much for watching. Go ahead and discuss in the comments below. Please keep it civil, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.